yesterday's dominant display would be the best way I'd sum it up by the Magpies. Defeated Essendon by 49 points in front of 91,000 at the G. It was just a perfect day. I think that's the best way to sum it up. It was a precursor for what's to come.
Well, take your Collingwood hat off because this is...
I don't have a Collingwood hat on, but I have a
jersey. A football equal...
An equalitarian
podcast.
society, as you like to say.
Equalitarian. So we are not biased here.
No, not at all.
Win.
No,
That's it.
we're
Not
not biased at all. Especially
Play
when
the-
it comes to Richmond, we're definitely
Was
not.
I ever biased? No.
Oh,
At the start of the year, I said they'll win the
gosh.
premiership. I never said, "Oh, we're going to win the premiership because we got the vibrant yellow jersey and all
Yes,
that."
you did.
Did not.
exactly.
No, I didn't.
Go back and decide.
Exactly what you said. The hypocrite
I never
over here.
said we.
All right.
I always said Richmond.
Enough shenanigans. Let's get on to the actual game. I think, okay, peg it back a little bit. Obviously, I'm over-exaggerating because I'm a Collingwood supporter and I need 3 days of joy before we get crushed by Richmond. I think the most impressive part was the way they carried on their form from last week, showed it wasn't just a one-week outlier. They took the game on again. They used handball, which we mentioned last week. They had 217 handballs against Adelaide. Again, they had 200 against the Bombers, and they generated a lot of their scoring from transition from the defensive half, running through the middle of the MCG, not afraid to take the game on, which was a complete direct opposite of Essendon.
That's the thing. How good were Collingwood
I don't
compared to Essendon? How poor they were.
I don't
Because
understand what they were doing. It was ridiculous.
that game was over in the second quarter because the Essendon players didn't want to track back or didn't want to get in hard. There was one moment, it was on the boundary, where Joe Danaher didn't go in hard and tackle. He just jogged around, allowed his opponent to get the ball.
We'll get to Danaher later, but he was really disappointing.
The entire team was disappointed.
Yeah.
On a big game like that, and you don't show up.
Not put in any work rate whatsoever. There was none.
Which the MO on Essendon before the season was they're a quick team. They're going to take the game on. They're an
They're quick at Etihad
offensive-minded
Stadium.
team.
It's easy to be quick at Etihad Stadium.
Not a small
Try and do it on a bigger ground.
The amount of times they got stuck in their defensive half, kicked it from one side of the ground, then just went back the other way, then went back the other way, did a switch, went one kick forward, went back again. The heat map would have been literally just white, red hot in their defensive half and nothing forward of that.
Well, the average for backwards kicks in a game for AFL teams is 9. They had double that in 18 backwards kicks.
It was ridiculous. Now, credit does need to go to Collingwood for their defensive setup. Collingwood's defensive setup under Buckley was laughable for quite a few years. The amount of goals out the back they used to give up, it happened every single week. They do look a lot more composed. They look like they know what they're doing now. If you look behind the ball, there was either Pendlebury, there was always someone who was pointing, making sure everyone was in the right spot. And the results so far this season have been really good. I mean, they rank 4th in the league in points conceded over the first 5 rounds. They got a top 4 defense if you rank it from points conceded. They kept the Crows to 58 and Essendon, which is an offensive-minded team, to 52. Once again, they won the inside 50s comfortably, 58-41. Kick 14-17. That's been bugbear of this side for years. Even back in their premiership teams, converting in front of goals was always an issue. But they still generated 31 scoring shots from 58 entries, which has been something that Collingwood
And
has.
they showed creativity up forward as well. They had the goalie goal. And then
A lot of their goals were really scrappy.
Yeah, but at least you're seeing the creativity there. That's the good part about it. They're showing those little crumbing forwards, which is what is in trend now.
Yeah,
Those
with the
kind of
Richmond.
smaller players can actually get the goals, and they're the ones that you need.
Yeah, and they're not relying on one big target, as in a Franklin kind of.
Because they don't
we
really...
need-
They got Mason Cox, and he's just doing his role, which is just get the ball down. But they
Did
need to
take
realise...
a couple of nice marks towards the end, did Big Mason.
Telling you, take your Collingwood hat off.
I think, obviously, Treloar needs some note for his Anzac Day medal performance. 34 touches, 8 inside 50s, 2 goals. Pendlebury was also good. Sidebottom had 25 and 3 goals. Tom Phillips, DeGoey looked really good as well. And just guys like Will Hoskin-Elliott, Varco, Murray, Treloar, Stevenson, they've added that X factor and that pace to a team that was lacking that, especially in the forward line in recent years. Ben Reid wasn't great. He had a pretty dirty day. He had a lot of opportunities. He
got
could have had a good day. He
got
could have probably kicked like 4. In the end, he kicked 1, 2, but he got his hands to a lot of marking attempts and then just spilled them. It wasn't a great day by him, but it didn't matter in the final results for the Magpies. And the question for them is they've now got guys like Darcy Moore, Taylor Adams, Jamie Elliott, Alex Fasolo, Daniel Wells. Who comes out for those guys? Because they're all in their best 22.
I would have put all of them in
Who not?
for Solo.
Fasolo's the one I would say is questionable, but if the Fazzy boy's ready, you got to put the Fazzy
No,
boy
I
in.
wouldn't put him in. I think he's a good player in a bad team. I would not put him in. I'll keep him in the VFL.
Can't say that about the Fazzy boy.
I'll say it
The
again if you
Fazzy
want
boy.
me to.
Say it again. Can you say that
He's
again?
a good player in a bad team.
Say that again.
That's what he is.
Got
I'll put
Darcy
Jamie
in
Elliott.
it.
Say that
Jamie
again.
Elliott's a walk-in.
Jamie Elliott. will come
Jamie
in.
Elliott's got to come.
Darcy Moore, I would put him back into the forward line and take Mason Cox out.
Wow.
That's what I would do.
No, I agree with you.
Who else? Who are the other players that you mentioned?
So we got
Daniel
Wells.
Wells.
He'll be in for 1 week before he does his hammy
I
again.
wouldn't put Wells in
No.
because
Taylor Adams
the young
has to
players are
come back
doing
in.
well.
Yeah.
The role that he would play is probably what maybe a Varco. Varco's not young, I know that. Either what a Varco does in the forward line or Sam Murray does in the back line.
Yeah.
And I would not take
Well, please don't
player
take him out
out
for Sam Murray, Buckley, please.
for Daniel Wells.
Taylor Adams has to come back in, though. He's the
Yeah.
instant must come back in. I think probably Brown, Callum Brown, Crocker, their spots are probably...
Oh, I wouldn't take Crocker out.
But
I like Crocker.
if you got to get Elliott in there, someone's got to come out in that forward line.
I
Who are you going to take out for then? Because you're not going to take DeGoey out. You're not going to take any of them out.
you'd probably get an injury sooner or later and I'll come back in.
Wow. But just back to Essendon, they had a lot of possession. They had 9 players with over 20 touches, 6 with over 25 and 3 with 30 plus in Zaharakis, Goddard and Merritt. As we mentioned, they just didn't take it on and their forward line suffered big time. Stringer kicked too early and looked on. The package was delivering according to BT in the first quarter, but then he went quiet. But is it really his fault? Because the ball wasn't even getting there.
I think there's 2 ways to look at how teams structure up the 2 styles of play in the AFL at the moment. You've got the Richmond style, which is to take the game on.
And pressure.
And then you've got the Hawthorn style, which is just to pass it around.
Meticulous kicking.
Collingwood are playing that Richmond style and it's working now. That seems to be the trend. That's the way to move forward in football. Yet there's still teams that are playing that Hawthorn style. And I'm thinking Essendon are trying to play that Hawthorn style possession, chip it around. And I don't think that's the way forward in football.
The thing is, they're not Hawthorn.
That's the thing. You can't be as good as Hawthorn.
And
Even Melbourne are like that. They try and play that style, but they don't have the skills to do it.
that only worked because Hawthorn's players were incredibly skillful and their confidence was to a level where they were okay to take the game on. Essendon had those kicks, but they just weren't willing to take them. They just went straight back the other way around. And now, as we've said multiple times, that game style doesn't seem to stack up to pressure anymore. No. In the last couple of grand finals, the prettier teams have lost.
Richmond tried playing that game style. They lost 3 finals in a row. And then they
go to pressure.
And then 2016, they didn't make the finals at all. They changed it to the pressure, and look what happens. Pressure is the way forward now.
Yeah, especially, it just seems to be, if you notice all the games, it's always, the skill level's down, but it's based off the pressure. It's just, as good as these players are, they can't seem to execute their skills at a high level compared to the amount of high-level pressure that the best teams can put on.
Well, I think at this moment in time, the skill level in the AFL isn't as good as what it was 10 years ago.
Especially set shot kicking, if you watch this game in particular, was atrocious.
Just the around-the-ground kicking.
Yeah.
So the way to
Would you like to testify to that, Brownie? Carl.
No,
So the way to fix
I'm
that
just going to keep quiet.
Just going to keep quiet.
is pressure.
Yeah.
Apply pressure because you can't. If you've got no skill, then you might as well just apply pressure.
Exactly. It's something that you don't need to be highly skilled to do. Now, obviously, Collingwood does have Richmond next week. May have alluded to that once or twice.
That's a big game.
Could be a grand final preview. I'm just putting it out there.
Oh, no. Here we go. Get the tickets.
Obviously, they then have Brisbane, Geelong, St Kilda and the Bulldogs. The Bombers now face a huge clash against Melbourne because the loser's going to be 2 and 4, which doesn't bode well for both teams who wanted to make finals. And then after Melbourne, they have Hawthorn, Carlton, Geelong, GWS, and then Richmond. So obviously Carlton, they'll be heavy favourites. But Hawks, Geelong, GWS, and Richmond. Sorry, Brownie. Sorry, but I think it's the truth. It's just with that run, it could get ugly for the Bombers. It's just, you don't know what you're going to get with this Bombers team. They've looked incredible at times. They've beaten Port Adelaide and the Crows. And then they come and dish out that performance, and they were down by like 30 at three-quarter time, but it should have been about 50 or 60. The game was over by halftime, really. It was just a disappointing performance.
Yeah, but there's a lot of infight in there as well. We've seen with Goddard.
Goddard.
A lot of players
Grumpy pants.
not happy with one another.
The pretzels would have been shaking in their boots after he ripped into...
Oh, I'm telling you, I reckon those players ripped into him at the end of the game there.
Well, he was giving it to Zaharakis.
Yeah,
he was giving it to God.
I think if Heppel
Danaher.
is a good captain, he would have ripped into him.
Last question from that game. Danaher. That was a chance to stamp himself as a big-time player, and he came up pretty small.
For how many years now have they been talking about him being the next buddy? He's not going to be the next buddy.
I've never rated him. Everyone's been on the bandwagon. I don't think he has the mental... He's not... What's the word? He just doesn't have that same mentality.
He doesn't have that killer instinct.
That's
it
what I'm
factor.
trying to
Work rate isn't there.
People can have their size on him and their aerobic capacity, which is what Buddy has. But the mindset of Buddy is something that Joe Danaher doesn't have. And I don't think Joe Danaher will ever be up to that level. He's going to be a good player, but he's not going to be Buddy Franklin.
And he's not physical enough. Like, he lets himself get outmarked and outworked by guys half his size. There was one where Sam Murray was on him and was able to punch it away. He should be dominating those.
He doesn't have that competitive nature.
Competitive spirit, yeah. And you see that sometimes. I don't like when people say you're smiling, that's a bad thing. But you do see that where he'll completely miss a shot and there's no sign of... oh, I just let myself and my team down. It's kind of like, that one, next.
Like, I'm one that doesn't like people players smiling
we're
when they're
different
losing.
there. But
Bernie Vince at the end of that Melbourne game was smiling. That's something
back to Melbourne.
that I wouldn't be happy with. But Joe Danaher smiling because it's like,
Melbourne.
Oh, I've missed that. It's more to do with that instead of I'm happy after a loss.
Melbourne have some issues to work through, and it makes a huge Sunday clash between Richmond and Collingwood.